and we both belong to the CRA, which is one of the largest private practice group in the New England area. And Al is the president, and Mimi is the chair of radiology at the North Shore Medical Center. They both are very well known for their roles in the vein specialist center, and they have a chain of hospitals, and they deal with a lot of contracts. So I think they are very appropriately invited here to express their thoughts of how and what and do's and don'ts of the contract. So I'll let Al go on and run away with this.
Great. Thank you, Shams. Thanks for the invitation. I know Mimi and I are both excited to participate here. We're obviously private practice, but we appreciate the tremendous value and incredible importance that occur at the academic medical centers. We wouldn't be here in private practice doing IR without the smart people down in the academic medical centers who keep creating new procedures for us to perform. So, and I will say just for 2 seconds, for those who missed the beginning of this meeting, there was some talk about women in IR, and Mimi, in addition to being the chair of radiology at North Shore Medical Center, she's the president of medical staff. She was chief of IR at North Shore Medical Center for a number of years, and she's a great role model for all radiologists, but specifically for women. She makes herself available to speak with women who are interested all the time. And if you're interested, you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't interested in being an IR, but I think she's a great resource to have locally.
I'm just going to make one correction, which is we are now Mass General Brigham Salem Hospital. So we are not North Shore Medical Center anymore. So it's like correcting my transgender child, or being corrected around pronouns. Like I feel like the need to keep correcting people. But anyway, so there you go.
So we're private practice radiology, and this is an actual title of an article in SIR a few years ago it was an HR article, about practice development and how many people are in private practice, but the curious case of private practice interventional radiology. So you can be a high quality interventional radiologist in practice in the community, and you don't get a lot of exposure to community IR in residency and fellowship. Certainly I didn't. I know most people don't. But in the end, 82% of IRs will be in private practice. So, it's important, I think, to learn about what private practice is. And this is just my only slide about, why private practice. So if you're in private practice, you really like doing procedures. You like it more than you like teaching, and you don't want to give up the performance of those procedures. But that doesn't mean you can't educate. And we have a very vigorous educational program within CRA, especially in IR, for referring clinicians and administration. And I think that pays dividends in terms of support from the hospital, for capital resources, and for the clinicians in terms of their support for us and belief in us as clinicians. You also get to govern, manage, and own if you're in a private practice that is a partnership. And if you still like clinical work and you like to lead clinical issues, every hospital has a chair or chief of radiology, and then the bigger groups also have division heads. So you still can lead clinically. And then if you're a more corporate or business person, there are corporate officers and boards and committees you can serve on. So before we get into actual contract language, just a few words about evaluating private practice. It's one of the things you don't get taught in residency or fellowship. When you go to interview for a group, what are you looking for? And I think, one of the most important things is the organizational structure. Is it organized as a partnership? Are there different tiers of partnership? Does one person own the contract for the hospital? Do many people, or do all the partners through the corporate structure of the group own the group? And then the governing structure of the group. Does one person make the decision? Is it an empowered board? Do the shareholders make decisions? These are all things that you should be able to talk about freely when you're interviewing. And there should also be a strategic plan of the group. If you ask, what's the plan for the group in the next 5 years, across the table, and you get sort of or across the Zoom call, and you get sort of a blank look, that's a red flag. A group should have a plan on what the issues are now, what the threats are, what the opportunities are, and they should actively seek to address those issues all the time. And then approach to the group for organized radiology. I think this has become more important over the last 5 or 10 years, but as I say, organized radiology in a lot of respects means academic radiology, or the academic radiologists who are leaders, as well as private practice people who are in organized radiology leaders. But a lot of decisions get made at the local, state, and federal level, and you want to be able to support those who can help your subspecialty. And in radiology, that means SERPAC at one level, but it also means supporting radiologists who you think have leadership talents with respect to the MRS and the ACR to lead in those groups. And then, what's the culture of the group? We like to say, in CRA, we're very flat and transparent. There's no hidden secrets. There's no decisions that get made in a dark room. Everybody takes the same amount of call that other people take. If you've been there for 20 years or for 20 days, you'll still do the same number of Christmas calls over the next 9 years, things like that. Current IR status and administrative support, we like to provide our applicants with the opportunity to talk to somebody in administration. Usually that's the COO, Chief Operating Officer, but it could be the CEO or a Chief Medical Officer. But to get that, external opinion on what the group is like, and I think that provides, comfort for people who are interviewing in terms of what the group's actually about. And then what the current IR status is. Do they have an IR doc? Do they just want to hire somebody who can do like dialysis catheters, not really interested in IO or building a UFI service or prostate embolization? You should be able to ask people in that group, what their view of IR is. If they have a sophisticated IR program already, then that's a sign that they value IR and are willing to support it. And then obviously, is there active vascular surgery or interventional cardiology? It's going to be a lot more challenging to start a PAD program as an IR doc if vascular surgeons and ICs it's not impossible, but it's going to be more challenging. You have to work harder. But it's just a data point that you should be aware of. And then obviously, is there a cancer center? Does the hospital send all of their cancer patients, into town or into the cancer center, regional cancer center is, wherever you're going to be getting your job? And are they happy to do that, or do they want to start keeping care local? And then what do we look for? It's always interesting to see how people get to us. There are a few people who have emailed us since they were second and third year residents who wanted a job in private practice and to stay in the Perry-Boston area. And we're a big radiology group, so that we're a natural group to at least connect with. And that's sort of aggression. You can imagine, IRs are generally aggressive people, I think, in a good way. So that kind of aggression, I think, is thought of as, you want somebody to join your group who really wants to join your group. Or did they respond to an ad, which is fine. Make sure, I would say, your CV and cover letter can't have any spelling errors, grammar, or syntax. That's a horrible thing to read. It's offensive to some people in my group to read a cover letter that has errors in it. So I would spend a lot of time doing that. Show it to a couple of people, have them critically evaluate it. When you try to make yourself available for the initial call, there have been people who I've tried to connect with, and they say they're not available until next Tuesday, and that's essentially telling me that they don't really care about connecting with me to discuss the possibility of joining the group. The right answer is I'll make myself available whenever you need me to be available. Within reason, obviously. But and then the interview day, we're coming back more and more to live interviews now, which is great. It's always good for people to see the group, and you get a feel for somebody across the table that you don't across the computer. But don't show up late, and dress appropriately. If you're male, or identify yourself as male, or female, identify yourself as female, whatever you are, come dressed like you want a job. And then the email after the interview, everybody does it, but that doesn't mean that it's okay not to do it just because everybody else does it, and it's expected, and it's appreciated, and it keeps your name and kind of circulating if you continue to connect with the leaders of the group. References are critical for private practice. It's great on your CV when you have when you have your, the 25 noon conferences that you gave to the medical students and things like that. But we want to talk to somebody who you work with who says this person comes in early or on time, they stay late, they're helpful, they're great to the techs, the nurses, the referring doctors, the patients. That's really what we're looking for. Like, references, in my mind, are the most valuable thing. And then post-interview contact. Don't be afraid to over communicate. Like I said.
Just to give you a sense of time, like you have like 4 or 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there are when you're evaluating contract, do all partners have the same contract? That's important. Non-competes are not really enforceable in Massachusetts. We can get into that later. I would definitely show a contract to an attorney. I mean, it's critical that you're not it's like having them do their own iliac angioplasty. You're not going to do it. They're not going to do that. You shouldn't be reading your own. You should making final decisions on your own contract. And then an offer sheet. So it's important for you to know what the job is, what the job is. What am I going to be getting paid? What benefits does the group pay? And that gives you sort of a total value of the first, second, and third year packages, let's call it, on a 3-year to partnership track. There are too many groups where people get involved in these discussions and they give mixed messages, and that's a bad look for the group, and it doesn't really inform the interviewee that well. Then there are mandatory benefits that are paid by the employee. Those are group insurances that everybody has to participate in, and then there are optional benefits. So you should know that, and this should all be sort of in the offer sheet. You should kind of know exactly what the job is like. It's don't feel like that it's inappropriate for you to ask. And then in terms of vacation and call. And then the employment agreement. So we're just going to cruise through this in about 3 minutes. So there are different sections of a contract, like services and duties. That could be just a basic few lines. It's very, very unlikely they'll agree to adding a % of IR in the services and duties portion of the contract, and that's not. We can talk about that later if you want. Compensation, obviously, that should be how much you're going to be getting paid and for how many years. And then there are other things that you can add. Sometimes the salary won't change, but moving expenses are something you can negotiate. Bonus is something you can negotiate. We could talk about why salary might not be negotiable later on. The term is important. How many years and what happens after that amount of time. Am I up for partnership? How do I get partnership? Do you decide, or does the group decide? And is there a buy-in? Termination, there are 2 types of termination: a voluntary termination, involuntary termination. Those should be explicitly described. How many days? If they decide they don't want you, or you decide you're not a good fit for that group, how many days of notice do I have to give you? And we can go into any of these things in more depth later on. What the paid leave is in terms of vacation, personal time off, that should all be spelled out. You don't want to leave anything to, if it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist as far as you're concerned. Malpractice insurance, there are different types of malpractice insurance we can get to later, but that should be spelled out in the contract. So this is the final slide. I can tell you, after doing 20 years of IR and hiring, a bunch of IR docs, these are the things that you should be thinking of. That your approach to the first job really depends on how sophisticated the IR services in the group you're joining. Are you the first IR doc there? It's going to be a totally different experience, and you got to be prepared for that. But whatever position you have, work harder than you ever had. There's no replacement for a hard worker. Come in early, the cases, you stay late, you help out your partners. If you can read cross-sectional imaging in between cases, you can do that. That would be huge. And this is probably the most important lesson I learned, and it took me a while to learn it. And it's something you'll never get taught, is you don't ask for resources to build a practice. Don't go in and ask for a nurse and 2 techs. Healthcare dollars aren't available, but prove you need it. So and don't ask for a clinic right off the bat. You'll never get that. but see patients in between cases for the clinic. Build the number of cases you're going to do. Then they'll have to, they're going to get tired of sending down an anesthesiologist or an ICU nurse to do your cases, and they'll hire you a nurse. Avoid complacency. Don't be happy where you are. There's IRs, as Sham said before, it's like, it's the best. I mean, it's a blessing to be an IR doc. It really is. And new procedures being developed all the time. You're going to leave fellowship and you're not going to know, you got to keep, you got to, be aware of all the procedures that are going on and all the, advancements, and try to implement them in your practice. And this is probably the biggest one. And this is something that people don't really, I think, appreciate, is by the time you get to looking for an IR job, you've been, you've competed your whole life, to get into AP Bio, to get, the Phi Beta Kappa, AOA, all that stuff, chief resident. By the time you get to the job, that's all done. You got to support your other, your fellow partners, especially if they're new IR docs, and that'll go tremendous in creating a great, I think, identity for you in that group. So that's about it. This is my contact info, and I look forward to talking about all this stuff later on. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Al. It was really great, a great overview of the whole process and everything. I'm sure a lot of people have questions, including me, but in the interest of time, we'll move on so that we can earmark all the time for questions later on. So with this, if you can unshare like your screen would be helpful. I'd like to invite Dr. Agnieszka Solberg. She is a star in her own right. She did her medical training at the Uniformed Medical Services in Baltimore, Bethesda. And after that, she did multiple residencies, including internal medicine, nuclear medicine, and diagnostic radiology, eventually ending up in IR. We are thankful for that. And she does a lot of talks on advocacy for women and women in IR governing body. And she formed the Radiology Chicks, which is a very famous group on Facebook, and it has probably more than 3,000 members, and which is a tour de force. So we're happy to invite her and like express her opinion on this stage. And Dr. Solberg, you want to take away from this?
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for doing anything. I think this is a great program. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I'm going to give a little bit different spiel. I don't have any slides. It's a little different perspective because I have the perspective of almost 4,000 women, and many of them call me and give me their woes about all the problems they've had with their contracts. And so my thing is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a conglomeration of advice based on the stories I've heard of where people went wrong or where things went wrong and why. And so mine is a little bit different. It's I really feel like the advice that you just got was excellent. It was wonderful advice. But I really a firm believer of telling the practice about what you want, because if it doesn't fit what they want, it's not going to be a good fit. So I wouldn't just tell people what Dr. Hoffman just told you to say. I mean, be honest in your interview, because if it's not a good fit, it's not going to be a good fit and you're going to be miserable. So if you don't want to work late, don't say that, because it's not, if that doesn't work with your schedule, that job will not be a good fit for you. And there are all sorts of jobs that are open, and not all of them have the expectation of staying late, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start by repeating the very important part about attorneys. Have an attorney review your contract 100%, even if it's what's called an adhesion contract. Those are the types of contracts by big hospital groups where they're changed very little. Have an attorney review it, because the attorney will at least advise you on what you can expect from that contract and where you stand. Even if they don't change anything, at least you know where you stand with that contract. As far as private practice contract, I did apply to some private practice jobs. None of them were a good fit for me. But the most important question to ask is, if there's a partnership track and that's the one you're applying to, how many people, are there any people on that track who didn't make partner, and why? I actually interviewed for a job where 9 out of 10 did not make partners. I was like, well, that's out, like that's not a good practice. Like they're using those people for 2 years of cheap labor. So you want to ask that question. The other important part where people have complained, like you say you sign a 5-year contract with a hospital, and there's a 90-day termination without a 90-day termination without clause in the contract. That's a 90-day contract. That's not a 5-year contract. Now this clause is good for both you and the hospital, because at any point you can quit with 90 days notice. At any point they can change their mind and let you go as well with 90 days notice. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. All I'm saying is that you need to be aware, is it 90 days? Is it 180 days? What is it? Because really that contract is really a 90-day contract. And at 90 days, that's the time you're gonna have to find a new job if something goes wrong with that, employment contract or that employment place. To me, that's the real length of the contract. And then non-competes were already addressed. You have to understand the non-competes in your state, what it means for you, and does the what is the area, what's the length of time, and how that all works. And every single place it's different. And it's very important that your lawyer understands what it means in your state. I usually have a lawyer in Nebraska review all my contracts, but she understands all the laws of all the different states. So the benefits package, some people have complained about issues with that. It's often not detailed in the contract for big hospitals what the benefits actually are. It says sometimes like benefits per whatever, subject to change. Well, sometimes it changes a lot from year to year. And if you're not willing to accept a large change, that employment, that hospital may not be for you. For example, I know a facility where 10 days of vacation were cut from 1 year to the next. That's huge if you have 4 weeks vacation, say, or 5 weeks, and or holidays got cut, not vacation days for, and so all of a sudden that's a whole week really of vacation, because you don't get time for holidays worked back, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was another practice where all the doctors get a letter of their new benefits every year, and they notice that the malpractice was cut by like some large number, as well as their, the life insurance was cut by 50%. That's a huge change if your salary is still the same. So it's just kind of important to just be aware of that. We kind of like sometimes we'll blow off the benefits, benefits package, but that's a huge cost. Like a change like that, 10 vacation days a year, that's 2 weeks of work, right? I mean, that's a huge change. And then as far as the contract itself, like sometimes where the duties are, it will just say like per regular IR schedule or whatever. Sometimes it doesn't actually detail what your job is, and how often, what's the length of time that you're expected to be there. Or it will say, this many hours plus call, and this or that. And so you just have to make sure that you get as many things in writing as possible. The majority of like the folks that have left their jobs because of contract issues, it's because of the job they thought they were signing up for. It's not what it ended up being. It wasn't like usually it's not like a huge salary dispute or anything like. It's more like, I thought I was going to be working at that facility, but they put me in this clinic. And I thought that I was going to be working Q4, but now they're telling me that I have to do Q3 for 6 months, and then maybe I'll get to do Q4, and I have to work Christmas and Easter this year, or whatever the holidays are. It's usually things like this, which do make a huge difference. And I know, like, to an employer, it's kind of annoying for people to be asking these questions up front, but in my personal opinion, it costs a lot of money to recruit a physician. And you might as well make sure that it's, for the employer, it's somebody that you're going to retain as long as possible. And the same thing for the employee. It's a pain in the butt to move, right? You want to make sure that the practice is what you expect. So I always ask questions. And if people don't like my questions or think they're rude or too intrusive, then that's not the practice for me, because I want to know what I'll be doing. And, for me, for my start time to change from, you got to be there at 7 to 8 to 6:30 say, that can be a disruptive change, and not everybody can just change something like that very quickly. Let's see what else I have written down. So anyway, the bottom line is try to have as many things written down on paper as possible, because that's usually where most of the issues come up. And just, remember, like, you can leave the job anytime. There's always a clause. It's either 90 days or 180 days. So it's not like you have to move sometimes because of a non-compete or this and that. So it's just very important to know all that stuff ahead of time. But it's not the hugest deal in the world to leave jobs. My employment situation has changed even within the same hospital I work in. My contract changed completely in the past couple of years, and that's okay. I know what the new contract means. And I'm okay with what it is now compared to what it was before. And I don't, it's fine. And I mean, you're just not tied to it. Like, you can always get another job. And luckily right now there are jobs out there. And the most important advice I have is just to do your diligent research and be honest, and you will find, the job that matches you and what you want from the practice. It is very important, to ask not what not ask for what the practice can do for you, but what you can do for your practice as well in the interview process, right? Like, you want to help the practice. But it's also important just to make sure that it's going to be a good fit, right? Because then everybody will benefit, everybody. Studies have shown that when people are happier at work, they do better. They have better RVUs, the patients have better outcomes and all this. So it's very important to have, to be a happy, content employee. And you can only do that in a practice that really matches your personality, your life, etc. So.
Thank you. Yes. So right on time. Thanks, Agnieszka. That's great. So again, questions at the end. So I'd like to invite Dr. Hamilton, Barbara Hamilton. She just made it on time because I see she's still in scrubs with her hat on. Welcome, Barbara. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good.
Wonderful to see you.
Perfect. A quick introduction for Barbara, and she's the Chief of Interventional Radiology at the Desert Regional Medical Center in Palm Springs, California. And she's the author of the famous book, Save Lives, Enjoy Your Own, Find Your Place in Medicine. And she runs the Tired Superheroine string, and she's great at that. So we really love to have you, and we'd like to hear your opinion about the contracts for the newbies who are probably facing that challenge right now. Barbara, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry if I'm missing any context about who the audience is, but I assume it's a group of trainees and maybe early career folks. And I like to talk about this subject on my blog because I think, it's a little bit taboo to talk about like the gender pay gap. So I like to talk about it from that vantage point and a little bit about my experience. I think it's really important that people realize there is a pay gap. It's alive and well in medicine. And that's one of the reasons why I took a more aggressive tack with negotiating throughout my career so far. So I have spoken about that on my blog. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free. I don't have any slides for today, but suffice it to say that I have, one of the memories that stands out for me in my 6.5 years as an attending so far was realizing that there was this big gap between what I was hired at as a post-fellowship grad and where I needed to be to make the median in my specialty. And so that was a huge leap. It was a couple $100,000. And so I actually took this figure, this big difference, and I broke it up in 5 years. And I figured in 5 years, I should be plateauing at the salary I want to land at. And so I knew I was going to need to negotiate basically yearly to get there. And so that's what I did. I think that's really a good way to make this real for yourself, because when you're coming out of training, it's so hard. We just take the salary that we're offered. There's no negotiation. You make a few extra bucks if you're chief resident, and there's nothing to negotiate. So, I mean, we're not taught this in any form or fashion. I think it's a great time now where we have more resources online, we have more information sharing online. And I think information sharing is the enemy of the pay gap. And it helps everybody to know there's a little bit more transparency in the world. So there are actually resources that I want people to know about. So, you know, of course, there's data about what people make in different parts of the country. There's even, like, I guess you'll say, lay resources like glassdoor.com, salary.com. You can actually search on some of these crowdsourced websites and find different salaries in different parts of the country. And that can just be useful information as you prepare to negotiate. I agree with everything that Agnes said. I think, you know, there are so many aspects to a contract where it's helpful to have somebody decipher the legalese. And it's okay as a physician, you know, you're hyper educated, but you don't know legalese. And so I think it's really important to know, you know, where your skill set ends and somebody else's begins. And I've found that that's been really helpful to have a lawyer go over a contract. Oh, Shams, you're muted.
Muted, Shams.
Yeah, perfect. So like at this point, I think we can hear Mimi's opinion on this topic also before we move ahead. Mimi,
Sure. Yeah. I just, do you want Brian to go first, or do you want me to go?
If you can go first would be.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, I just, you know, Al obviously represents CRA, and he's sort of in there doing all the negotiating when we interview and hire. We all, you know, a big group of us interview and vet candidates. And I agree with everyone. I do think it's a little bit, I think in the beginning, it's almost a little bit of a game. Like, I think you want to get the job. Like, you just want to get the job. And obviously you've done your research, and hopefully you're interviewing at a job that you think, based on what you know, you want. So we're going to assume that it's a job you want, and you want to sort of get the job offer. I think once you have the job offer, you know, I see it as a part two. And it's like what Agnieszka said, or Agnes, I'm not sure what you like to be called, I apologize. You know, I think then you really want to confirm, like, is it the job you thought you were looking for, and ask all those really detailed questions. And again, it isn't about the money. The money often is pretty fixed, as Al said. Like, we're going to treat in a private practice anyway, our model is there's no like secret deals. Everyone gets paid. It's like the same thing. The one negotiation might be if you've been out of training, it's 2 years to partner versus 3 years. But that's one of the things about our group, is that it's very transparent. Everyone gets the same vacation, you know, pay. It's a share of the bucket. But it can be things like understanding how vacation is chosen. Again, we happen to have this very rotation. There's no seniority, but ask that about the group. How is it determined? Is there seniority around those issues? Find out, you know, the things that matter to you, like the percentage of IR. You know, we do 100% IR, and we all love that. That may not be great for some people. You may want to do a little diagnostic. So those things matter as well. And so I think once you get the job offer, clarify that it resonates, that it is a fit, like Agnes said, that it is going to work, and listen to the, you know, the red flags that feel like they might not work are important to pay attention to. And I have a different opinion about like getting, you know, leaving. I mean, yes, you're never trapped in these jobs, but again, my perspective is I joined CRA 24 years ago, and here I am. Again, I was the 10th person then. Now we're 68 people. It has changed. My job has changed. I was, you know, all focused on my clinical work and being you know, fine-tuning my IR skills early, and then became more interested in administrative stuff, safety, chief of IR, and now chair of the department. But I would say that there's a lot of work that goes into joining a practice, and you want to try to get it right. You just want to optimize that, because the benefit you get from the relationships, from the longevity, from your reputation, if you can get it right, I think there's value to that. So both things are true. You're never trapped in a bad job. You can always leave. But I think there are things you can do to try to optimize that you're making the right decision. And some of the questions I would ask are things around, you know, like flexibility, you know, change, part-time, locums opportunities, like things like that. You know, things that might show that the group isn't very rigid, but that there are ways to, that there are fair ways to evolve, change, adapt, as your needs change. You may want to work harder early when you don't have kids. You have kids, you want to cut back, and then your kids grow up and you want to grow into administrative or leadership positions. So things like that. Just I would say try to get it right. So anyway, those are just a few of my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thanks, Mimi. So at this point, I'll call Brian to present his thoughts. Brian is a past president of SIR. He has been the counselor for the international section, and he has been a mentor to a lot of people, including me, in different capacities. So without much ado, I'll let Brian share the screen and take away from here. Brian.
Thank you. Let me just share the screen real quick here.
Yeah, if not, I can do that too also for you. Perfect.
Is it up? Yeah, just one sec. Share screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you see me?
Brian, we need to find a millennial or someone to help you here.
It's so true. Okay, how about now?
Nope.
Yeah, good.
It's up, but it's not.
It's up. Okay.
But put it in present. Hey.
Okay. Is there happiness?
Whoop.
So Shams, thank you for the introduction and the invitation. And I'll just take a couple minutes. I have to remind you that my most important past job was president of NESIR. So glad to see that organization's continuing to thrive with great leadership like yourself. So I took a bit of a different tack on addressing these issues, and it's a bit off the cuff. But I thought the point in the whole conversation of employment that we were talking about tonight was really when you get that email or that letter or that phone call, the on behalf of whoever, some of us are pleased or thrilled or heartened to extended offer of employment. What next? So I thought back a little bit about myself, and I thought for a few minutes about when was my first contract. And I determined that this is a photograph of me actually reading the first contract at the age of 3. And it was a contract that basically stated if I would agree to deposit my poops in a little kitty potty, I would get a treat. I agreed to comply with the contract, was successful, and got the treat. This is a good deal. You think about your life is filled with contracts, with understandings between people that you enter into, and you agree to perform a service or fulfill certain responsibilities in exchange for compensation of some form. For me, the most scary contract I ever entered into was at the age of 21 when I accepted a commission in the Navy in exchange for a scholarship for med school and a 12-year commitment after that, which took me to the age of 35. And the thing I was most fearful of was the commitment, which says something. I think that's what people have anxiety about contracts about to a certain degree, is that commitments are frightening. In the course of a career, I've entered into 3 academic contracts, 1 private practice contract, and been chair of 2 departments. And like Alan, I've hired quite a few people over the years. For most of the people listening tonight, I assume that you're looking at your first jobs. As others have said, that's good news in a sense, because it means that you're a bit of a commodity. You have a pretty much similar training and experience, and your market value is fairly uniform and easy to define, which simplifies some of the issues. It unfortunately does leave you a little bit less room for negotiation around salary, whether you're talking academics or private practice. There's always opportunity in the spaces of signing bonuses or relocation bonuses, some people call them. There can be opportunity for additional compensation wrapped around call compensation or performance incentives, and relocation benefits tend to be have a little flexibility associated with them. So those sort of one-time bonus types of things at the time you sign up for a job tend to be a place where there is opportunity if you're interested in additional cash. When you're looking at a contract, some additional things to pay attention to include things like CME time and how reimbursement for that time is approached. You know, oftentimes the allowances for CME and for licensure and professional society membership doesn't come close to covering the actual cost. So just be aware of that up front. Another thing to look at in contracts, I think it was Dr. Sulberg mentioned benefits. I agree with her. Look at the time to vest and look at whether there's 1,000-hour rules associated with the benefits package. That is, many benefits packages require that you are employed for half a year before you vest before you begin, the time clock begins toward vesting. So if you start a job, let's say you finish training in July, you take a month off, month and a half off, it's sometime mid-September, you may not vest for another 6 months. So your clock for a 3-year vesting period for benefits may be actually 3.5 years. So pay attention to that. So you just got your contract. What do you do next? Well, the first thing you do is read it. And I'd suggest you do that with a red marker these days. Track changes on Word. Note errors. It's almost rare that there's not an error in a contract. And just highlight the areas where you have questions. It's perfectly reasonable to have questions, and use that to create a punch list of think about what's missing in the contract, what elements of the conversations that you've had are not in the contract. What bothers you? You know, is there language that you're uncomfortable with that you don't understand? Just basically note it on a punch list. Is there anything in the contract that's simply not acceptable? Make sure that you pay attention to that. And then what have you not considered? You know, it's really the what ifs that are the toughest thing to deal with when you're looking at a contract. You know, what if the hospital goes out of business? What if the hospital's bought? What if the group is replaced, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have that punch list pulled together, really, I think the next step is to determine what kind of issue you're dealing with. Is it an issue that really belongs in a contract? Or is it an issue of fear or trust? Or is it really a non-issue? Is it something that's important to you, but time will answer the question, and there's no point in really perseverating or trying to fix a potential concern at the time that you sign up for the job. And I think you try to think through the issues that you find when you're looking at a job. That way you might be able to get yourself to the point where there's just a few issues that you need to resolve before you sign the dotted line. In job descriptions, it's interesting, the conversation of about what percentage of IR you should have. I think that's a shifting issue. I think as IR becomes, or now that IR is a primary specialty, I'm dating myself. I think now you're in a better position to negotiate on that, and certainly pay attention to that and make sure that the agreement that you're entering into fits with your expectations. What sorts of resources are provided by the hiring party? Again, that's more for senior division chief and chair types of roles. That stuff should be memorialized either in a contract or in a letter attached to the contract. Clinic time. I agree with what Alan said about that you perform and the resources will follow, but I also believe that you should have the conversations about what your expectations are in the context of the whole interview process, and in some place memorialize some of those conversations. That could be simply an email with the hiring party. So you say, here's what I'm coming in expecting. I just want to make sure that you understand the same thing. It could be that all the way into something that is an element of a job description and a contract. Compensation. Alan, I think, covered that well. Pay attention to how the at-risk compensation is calculated, and performance-based compensation schemes. Pay particular attention to RVU-based performance compensation, because particularly as an IR, if you're in a hospital that does a lot of service type of IR, or sort of low end or IR light, your RVU generation ability will be severely limited. Partnership buy-in, I'd pay attention to that, because I think we're in a downtrending market now. You don't want to be stuck in a situation where the buy-in is more expensive than the value of a piece of the practice. And again, there's quite a few people that have been caught in a situation where the group is sold in the past few years. Where do you stand in those situations? You know, if you're a junior partner and you're in the process of buying in, if that's the sort of practice that you join into, and the group's sold, what happens? Do you get a piece of the purchase, or are you left not at the table? Non-compete clauses are legal issues, and they vary dramatically state to state. So lawyers need to help you with that. And then what are the contract renewal provisions? Contract auto renew. I agree with what Barbara said, that contracts are really great tools to evolve with your position as you grow. So it's not a bad idea on an anniversary date of a contract to use that as a reason to enter into a conversation about where you are and where you're going, and address the question of whether the contract might benefit from some rewording or rephrasing. Common issues that I hear from people when they're looking at contracts, one is that the language is generic and it's written for a diagnostic job. Oftentimes it's university boilerplate. I agree it's very hard to get anybody to change that language, but I do think that we'll see it start to evolve as IR again becomes accepted as a primary specialty. I was just saying, sometimes the contract fails to evolve with the job, and it's really your job to know what's in your contract. And if there's a significant gap between what you do and what you were hired to do, it's perfectly reasonable to ask for a change in your contract. Growing percent of IR as a practice grows. You know, that's pretty typical at the time of hiring. That's what people are told, that, you know, hey, build the service and you can spend more time at the service. The things I'd want to know about is, what's the formula there for time allocation? Is it based on the amount of time you're working? Is it based on the number of RVUs you're getting? Is it based on the ability of the group to allocate extra time for you? So a couple of quick take homes. First one is, when you get the contract, read it, make a list, classify your issues, and prioritize them. Only raise the issues that are important to you, and spend some time thinking about that and clarifying the issue and making it succinct and clear as a problem that needs to be solved. Boilerplate can be changed if necessary, but the bigger question is it really necessary? And really the big take home is to have reasonable expectations from a contract. They're great as basically a retrievable source of the facts and the understandings at the time you were hired, but a contract's different than a law. It's not, nobody's going to be arrested because they're not complying with your contract, and the legal process involved with addressing issues of poor compliance with the contractor are convoluted and difficult to navigate. I think it's important to use the process to confirm that you're on the same page as your new employer, and think through the what ifs, especially those that carry financial repercussions, even if they seem unlikely. And as several people said, if it doesn't feel right, listen to yourself. If it doesn't feel right, be willing to walk away. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. It was really great, very in-depth, and touched a lot of important points. So like, we are at the session, part of the session where we are free to question. And I think we already have gotten a few questions. And the first question was about academic, from Michael Chorney to everyone. Any experience with academic contracts in so far negotiable items? So I think, Brian, you'll be in a good position to answer. And Ray, if you can pitch in also, because you did answer, but if you can speak out a little bit more, because like we belong to one of the academic centers. Brian?
I've heard that Mass General is an academic center. I don't know. You know, one thing I was going to touch on, I failed to, was that there's contracts, there's a legal document, you know, with a signature of an executive in the hospital and your signature on it. There's also the conversations you have with the people you're going to work with every day and ultimately report to. Those are actually much more important than the contract ever will be. And I think taking the time to put together thoughtful and well-composed emails to the hiring person saying, here's what I hear you saying, here's what's important to me. I want to make sure that we're on the same page, because I want more than anything to make this an amazingly successful effort That's what it's all about. It's all about communicating effectively. And I don't know, Alan, Mimi, and others, when you're in the hiring seat, I love that. I love when I'm interviewing somebody and they say basically, can I ask you a question? And they ask a hard question, and they do it in a fashion that's thoughtful and clear and direct. Because that's the sort of person, when there's a problem, they're going to do the same thing. And that's the sort of people you want around. So, to me anyways, I'd rather have somebody who asks questions and shows that they're thinking and communicating effectively than somebody who's kind of holding back, who you kind of wonder how they're going to deal with issues down the road.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that a little, if I could, from a non-academic point of view, because you sort of touched on it a little bit, and maybe also just defend Al's show up early on time and work late comment, which I think what that really is about is, for private practice, we're hiring a person like joining a family. Like we want someone who wants to be part of our group, is a hard worker, but is gonna is gonna help the partner out. It's more that feeling. And so that goes a little bit to what Brian just said. The contract's important, but and there's some factual stuff, but it is also a little generic. You want to feel like it's someone you can talk to, that you can trust, that you can have conversations, that you can ask about your kids, that you're going to want to come to work and work hard because it feels like the right thing to do, and it's not, like resentful or a burden. And so I think for a private practice, when I interview people, I look at the CV, and I honestly, like, a lot of that doesn't matter that much in terms of, people are well trained, they're smart, they got to where they were. I want to know what your character's like. Do I want to sit next to you? Can I ask you for help? Are you, things like peer learning, what's QA like the culture of the group, and being able to have conversations means that whatever is unexpected in your future that might be difficult, you're amongst a group of people that's going to help you work that out, and I think that's the hard thing to gauge, but to me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I will say too, I agree with everything you said, Mimi, and Brian. I think that was a great presentation. I think you made some amazing points. And just to jump onto what you said at the end was, like, if it doesn't feel right, then you need to walk away. And there's no job that's worth signing on to if there are big questions that remain. Like, you should never be pressured to sign something by a certain date if you're not comfortable. And if you back it up, we have maybe 7 or 8 people interview the candidates, but we have 68 or 70 radiologists, and we provide that candidate with a contact list for everybody. Like, we're not hiding anybody. There are some groups where especially if you go visit a practice, if it's small, and there are four IRs there or 4 radiologists in the whole group, and you only get to talk to 3. Why don't they let you talk to the 4th? There's something. If things don't feel right, you should have access. You should have access to whatever information you think you need to make that decision. And then, with respect to coming in early and staying late, I can tell you that comes from when I first showed up at this job, I did 3 days of breast imaging after an IR fellowship, and it just so I knew that we needed to help. We needed to grow the IR practice, so I wouldn't have to do any breast imaging. That was totally selfish in the beginning. But as it turns out, IR docs want to do mostly IR. And the only way to do that is by committing to creating an IR service that's sustainable, which means if you're going to do 100% IR, you can only have a certain number of IR docs who are on vacation at any given time. So school vacation, so your DR partners might get, more DRs might be able to go away on school vacation week than IRs. So
it's pretty appropriate on a school vacation week, I guess.
Right, exactly. Look where I am. Right?
Good. A question from Pranav to, I think I'll put it to Barbara on this one. If a practice is not providing tail coverage to all current employees, is it reasonable to ask for it? And how much importance do you put on tail coverage?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it sounds like the person asking is, maybe you can put it in the chat, you're aware that they have, like Agnes explained, that an occurrence policy is automatically going to have the tail rolled in. If you're aware that they are not covering tail for anyone, I still think it's worth trying to negotiate, and you have to be aware that this is an expense that can run $25,000 and above. So it depends on the length of period of time. They don't cover tail for everyone, or they don't cover for anyone, he says. I'm not sure which. So you need to know that this is worth, tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how long you're practicing, and of course, the state that you're practicing in. So that premium, I actually have recently been on the line for that. I was employed, just as a quick story, I was employed by a group that had an occurrence policy, and then that group became financially insolvent. So overnight, basically, I was on the line for my tail as a new group came over and now owned me as an employee. So kind of like, whoa, like let's pull out $25,000 overnight. So it's anyway, hopefully you'll never be in that position. And if you are, just know that that's what it's worth in your contract. So if you can try to negotiate somewhere else, maybe that'll compensate for that loss, or it may just be something that you need to budget for in the future. If you ever plan
I
to
think
leave.
Agnieszka came very strongly on this. Why don't you just weigh in on this, please?
Oh,
You,
me?
you won't take the job, yeah.
So I personally would question why a practice would not cover their employees' tail insurance in any way. Whether providing an occurrence policy or a claims made policy with prepaid tail, those both cover tail in slightly different ways. The occurrence policy covers a little bit more total coverage each year. The claims made is a little bit less total, but at least it's there. So I would just wonder why I would ask myself the question, why is the practice trying to save money there and not somewhere else? Like, why doesn't it cover tail? Because that's odd. I'm not a part of private practice, but I've never interviewed a place where tail wasn't covered, except the 1 week that I did as a locums when I was a hospitalist. And I signed up through Delta Locums or something to work a week in Indiana because I needed cash. And I didn't know. I didn't have a lawyer. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and they didn't cover tail. I found this out later. Everything turned out okay, but like that's unless it's a locums company, I really don't expect people not to cover tail. That's weird.
Yeah, Shams,
Mimi, what's your go ahead, Brian.
Shams, I can jump in here. It's highly variable across the country. Part of it depends on what types of policies are available. Oftentimes, you're dealing with a group of 20, 30 people. The group is negotiating with an agent for a policy. So whether they end up occurrence-based or claims made, probably certainly for a junior hire, you're not going to shift the approach that the group has towards insuring. I think for the people listening on this call, pay attention to claims made policies and pay attention to them specifically, because if you do leave the group, then the tail's a considerable expense. And that's an important thing to understand. And I do agree with everybody here that it's preferable, desirable, maybe even ethical that policy be paid for by the group. I know it's not the norm across the country.
Perfect. There's a question for Barbara. You mentioned you had to do a significant amount of negotiating year to year to get to a level of salary parity. Can you elaborate on this, please?
Yes. So my contract, it had an evergreen clause. I assume this is common. And so if it's not brought up again, your contract just renews. It just remains in effect. And so I would purposefully bring it up for discussion. And after fellowship, I was hired at the same as my co-fellows. It's just that there's this period in your career in the first few years where you should expect that number to increase. So if you're just letting your contract go evergreen, it's a huge missed opportunity, and you are potentially going to be taken advantage of. So I actually set a calendar reminder for myself each year to just, it's January. I have to email that person who helped me sign my last contract and set up another meeting, because, you know, you just have to force yourself to do it. We're not used to doing this. And I think it's just a learning curve. And then I think part of the question was, like, how did I choose which facets of the contract to negotiate? There was a point at which I had the opportunity to go IC. Sorry about that. And, you know, so that was advantageous for a time. And then I was able to negotiate more time off.
I'll just route the question to Alan and Brian, who had hired a lot of people. I think this evergreen contract is a little unfavorable to the new attendings. So, like, why do people have that? Number one. Number two is, like, what are the other kinds of contracts you guys have put forth to new hirees, please?
We'll take it first, Brian.
Sure. Oh, want to take it first? I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Sir, I'm happy to. So I think it's fairly typical for larger organizations to have an initial contract period around 3 years, and your salary, depending on the environment you're working in, it should be defined, and it may run up a ramp during those 3 years, or it may not, depending on where you start and where they want you to end. After that, most policies will most contracts will automatically renew. And so the question is really, how does market compensation work in the context of the contract? So I think some contracts, particularly those in private practice groups, it sort of adjusts itself automatically because they're cutting the pie and the number of pieces of partners that are in the group. In university environments, it tends to be more of a cost of living increase type of issue. I know that when people have come to me in my current role, which is employed by a hospital, it's a market analysis question. And so we have a salary consultant, and we basically say, an interventional radiologist producing this many RVUs at this stage in their career, what's the range for salary? And that's how it's determined. But if we change one person's salary, everyone's would change.
Right. So it's the same approach as CRA. So we have two different kinds of contracts. We have a partnership shareholder track contract, and it's 2 years or 3 years, depending on how much experience you have. And we essentially don't ever renegotiate. It's the contracts we make intentionally very fair. We've been told by our counsel to change it around a little bit to protect us more in some aspects, and we just decline it. We like saying that everybody signs the same contract, even the people that have been there for 20 years. And it's those contracts are graded. First year, second year, third year, you're making more money and you get more vacation each year, and then at the end of the 3 years, you're up for shareholder status. And then the second type of contract that we just started using are just employment agreements. So there are there's no chance of shareholdership. You come in and you work and for however period of time. And those we don't. There's an evergreen clause in there. We haven't. We just started using that type of contract, so we've never had to. So we haven't had to implement it. We haven't got to the evergreen portion of it yet, but all those contracts are for the same amount of money for 3 years or 2 years with the same expectations of calm, the same vacations.
Great, thanks. There's one question about how do you demonstrate your value when you discuss contracts, because it's early and everybody is kind of in the same level. So Mimi, you want to take this, please?
Well, again, I think in our group, there isn't a lot of variability, right? I mean, I'll just explain, if we decide we want you, the biggest decisions are going to be around, the 2 year to 3 year to contract to partnership, or there's some negotiation around, relocation bonus, sign-on bonus, so you can negotiate there. Maybe a retention. We have found that as the group got larger, it used to be that once you came to CRA, you never left. We've had a little bit of some people leaving. So obviously, and it's a lot to onboard people. So So I think there is some negotiation potential that, you get an extra something, after 1 year, after 2 year, if you stick it out. But I think that also goes back to the difference between being an employee and being a partner. So the thing about, our group, and I imagine there are other private practice groups still out there where you are going to be an owner, you're going to be a partner, is, once you're a partner, like partners are equal in our group. So it's finding out again that that's the case. So there is a negotiation. You get your share of the bucket, we bill, we collect, and we divide it evenly. The only differences are if you're a part-time partner, right? If you choose to work 4 days a week or 3 days a week, then you're a 0.67 or 0.82, whatever those numbers are, and you get that percentage of the bucket. And we sort of distribute everything at the end of the year. So it's very transparent. It sounds very different than I think, employee agreements or, an academic setting where everyone has like different deals. So
perfect. I have a personal question because I have changed jobs once in my career, and the way it sounded that you guys said that the salary is fixed, but in my second contract, I saw there was some margin in which we were looking at, like there was a spectrum in which they feel like there's a certain range even at the same level. So I was wondering, like, what's your thought, Brian? Like,
Sure.
like,
Well, I know you too well, Shams. So the second job had an administrative component, and it's a more senior position. As you get further along in your career, the wiggle room grows. Ray can speak more to university environments because it's been a while since I've been in one. But in hospital employed environments, you're harder to define. As long as your numbers are reasonable, there's a little bit more room to negotiate. The one scenario that I've seen a few times though is where people come in with crazy numbers and they say, well, I generate billions of dollars a year for a hospital. Well, that's swell, but we can't use that as a justification. We can only use your professional revenue as a justification. Otherwise, you end up in all sorts of legal jeopardy situation with inducements. And so hospitals are pretty strict on that account. But I would say the further along you get in your career, the more likely it is you'll be able to have some wiggle room on your negotiation, particularly if a place wants you.
Yeah, then a follow-up question arises, like, I know we all talk about our physician compensation in terms of the physician revenue, Part B, which we call. However, we know for a fact that vast majority of us cannot make up our salary with the Part B, and the hospitals or the systems, they come and subsidize us. So isn't that fair to say, like, if somebody is generating a lot of revenue, they should be subsidized a little more than others?
It's against the law, but it's fine to say.
I will say I can't imagine what the hospital administrators would say if we went up to them and asked them to subsidize their salaries.
Yale has this system in which, because they were losing so much revenue and they were losing IR physicians, that I know for a fact. Kim is the chief there, and he mentioned that like the system came and helped them out. Otherwise, they would have lost pretty much everyone. So
hospitals have to be very careful about how they deal with the professional operation, right. And the intermingling of funds is a really sticky space. So there's ways that a hospital can support the professional operation, but they had to be very careful about actually supporting. If you're a provider and you're generating professional revenue, the hospital can't say, well, I'll pay you extra to generate that professional revenue. They can say, we'll pay you for administrative work, right. Or medical direction. But as far as the nuts and bolts of it, it's really a space I think most hospitals don't want to get caught up in.
There's a very interesting string going on about. Sorry, Ray started a very interesting string.
Yeah. About Al's take on it and Mimi's.
So I think it's a very important thing to touch, other than like contracts too.
It's such a simple question, Al and Mimi and others, right? It's sort of, when do you start? And my fellows struggle with this every time, because every practice, academic or private, says, we need you July. You got to start in July.
Yeah.
We need you, we need you, we need you yesterday. But it's the only time in their lives that they can travel, relax, enjoy life for 2 months. I've never taken, a 2-month vacation in my life since I started. So how do you balance the tension between wanting to establish a good rep, be cognizant of your partners, but push back rightly so?
I think you ask. I mean, we've done it,
Yeah.
right? Like, we hired someone recently. He had a wedding in August. He started in September. He took the summer off. I think that's what I was saying before. You want to get the job first, and then you negotiate. And it depends on how important that job is. And, if that's a make or break, that might be a sign too. It's sort of a little litmus test. But I think if we've decided we really want someone, you ask, and maybe it's a compromise. Maybe it's not 2 months, maybe it's 6 weeks, but you got to ask. You don't not ask, right?
Yeah, and exactly. We've all been there. Like, even if people in private practice have did fellowship in a academic medical center and then started in a in the private practice. So we know, like, we never would expect somebody to start July 1. Some people want to. Some people absolutely want to. They need the dough. They've got loans or whatever. But to Mimi's point, I think, and a lot is dependent on the size of the group and how much you can, how much you really need somebody. But we try to accommodate those types of requests. We want somebody coming into the group that before they get here, they feel like their needs are being addressed and they're valued. I think the payback is huge for that.
Just a question to Brian. Like, it said, like, you start your benefits 1 year later. Can you elaborate a little bit, Brian? Like,
Sure.
if you join 2 months later, what happens?
Sure. Well, for most, for instance, matching on 401k or 403b plans, there's a period of time that you have to be employed before you vest in the matching. And the rules that determine when that point in time is vary across institutions by the compensation benefits plans at the institution. The thing to watch out for, just to be aware of, is that it's not unusual for there to be it's called a 1,000-hour rule, which is basically if you work 9 to 5, it's 6 months. And when they look at us and they look at from an HR perspective, even though we may work 12 hours a day, it still counts for 8. So you just have to be a little careful. If you start later in the year, let's say you begin working in July of 2021, and it's 3 years to vest, so you'll vest at July of 2024. But if you start working in September, you won't meet, if they have that rule, and it's not unusual, you won't meet the threshold for vesting until the following year. So you'll push your actual vesting date out a full year. Make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Good. So any
Yeah,
more
so
questions?
can I just one additional
Sure.
comment, just to like the big picture view. When you get a job, you want to know, how much hour am I going to do? What's my vacation? What's my salary? And what's my call? And those are all critically important questions. But when you step back and you look at your career, the things like benefits are going to make the difference between, and things like when can you retire, and what's the quality of your career going to be. And things like time to vest are huge, right? The time value of money, like you could almost never make up for the money you lose if you leave a job before you're vested when you're 32 years old and you've got 150 grand in there or whatever it is. So those are the real questions, and those are the answers. So those are the questions you really need to ask, and you should have answers. And if people are hesitant to give you answers, or they don't know the answers, or you get different answers, that's a big red flag.
Perfect. Good. It looks like we are pretty much caught up with the questions also. So I'll, in the interest of time and respecting everybody's time, we should call it a day. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for all the panelists and everyone showing up on a school vacation week to discuss a very important topic, contracts. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night now.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.